Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a long day already, and if you made it to the last session, we're deeply grateful. Um, and, I think one thing that I'm Beth Goodhue. I'm the Associate Director for Faculty Engagement at CAT. I think I said that when folks first arrived, but many of you arrived since then. I'm here with Muriel McClendon from History. Hi, Muriel. As well as many other folks from CAT who are going to help us staff the chat today. Michelle Gaston and Adrienne Levine from CAT, and Kenzo Haas is here. So we all just want to thank you so much for joining us, for all the work that everyone has been doing to step up in these unsettled and surprising times. We're here today with also 4 guests from the faculty to help share their strategies for evaluating student performance in the humanities, arts, and social sciences. Tawny Paul from History, Pierre Olivier Weil from Economics, Kiana Mahajan from Asian Languages and Cultures, and Lionel Popkin from World Arts and Cultures and Dance. So thank you to all of you too for being here today. You should have received a notification when you joined the room that we were recording this session. When you sent in your RSVP and you got your confirmation, it has more information about that. We're recording for the purposes of just posting these sessions to the CAT website when we're done. If you don't want to be part of the recording, you can turn off your video, you can mute yourself, or use a pseudonym. There are other bits of information about how to handle that in the email that you received. Please mute your mic unless you're speaking. We're a decent sized group of folks today, so it'll be helpful for us to keep folks muted when they're not talking. We've designed this session to be an interactive dialogue, so there'll be plenty of time for you to unmute and ask questions. But just if you could save that for the discussion portion, that'd be great. The chat's going to be monitored the entire time we're here, so you can always drop questions in there at any point. And because we're a large group, that's going to be the easiest way for us to field your questions. There's also an electronic hand that you can raise under participants. You'll be able to click that next to your name, but because we're a large group, I think the chat is often a faster way to signal you have a question, and then we can even answer that sometimes without needing to stop the conversation. I'm here with my small child as well. That's why I'm swaying back and forth. And so thank you for your understanding and support through this. Hopefully we make it through 90 minutes. Quick overview of today's session. We're here to explore creative approaches to assessment in the humanities, arts, and social sciences. We're going to kick off with brief reflections from our faculty guests about the things that they've been doing in their courses and their disciplines. Then we'll break out into small group discussions to talk a bit more about what you heard, as well as what you've been doing in your classes and any questions that you have as you plan for the remainder of this current quarter. And then we'll come back for larger group discussion. We'll also be sure to share resources with you, and if you need further support, after the session concludes, you can always reach out to those of us at CAT at consult@teaching.ucla.edu. There's also within the Google Doc we'll be using in the breakout session an opportunity to indicate you'd like individual follow-up in that as well. Okay, I'm going to stop that for now. Are there any questions about the general kind of format and structure for today?
None.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so then we're going to start off with our 4 guests. Muriel, maybe I'll kick this over to you if you want to call folks out, and we can get them started.
Okie doke. Let's see who's, let's see, I think in order of who was on your slide, I think Tawny Paul from History was first. Tawny, take it away.
Great, thanks. So I'll preface what I'm about to say by acknowledging that it's fairly theoretical at this point, and I'm trying new things, and I don't know if they've worked yet. But my approach to assessment and to teaching in this new digital environment has really been to lean in to the digital and to not try and force what I normally do into this new format, but to really try new things. And so for me, that started with actually modifying my learning objectives. I'm teaching a capstone seminar, so it's a relatively small group of students, and it's a research-heavy course. The way that I had envisioned my course, which is on the history of early modern poverty, was as a very out of the classroom type of course. We were going to spend a lot of time in archives, and obviously that can no longer happen. So I've started bringing in a lot of digital humanities resources, and one of my learning objectives is for students to become familiar with digital humanities technologies and methodologies, and to be able to demonstrate strategies for locating primary and secondary sources using these online databases. So, you know, they are very much in this digital world as we are right now. And I think that really thinking critically about that space and incorporating that into the learning objectives is a good thing to do right now. So in assessment, I also got rid of the final essay that I was going to do, and we're doing an online exhibition instead. So we're spending a lot of time thinking about how exhibitions work online. We're doing some visits together to digital museums, and then we're creating our own space where the students will be displaying their research. So yes, that's what I'm doing.
Thank you. Let's see, I can't remember who was next on the slide. Jan, were you next on the slide? Well, you're next now.
Okay. And I'm going to share my screen. See, you can tell that I've been doing some remote teaching for a few weeks now. This would have taken me much longer otherwise, but now I'm getting better at it. So there's hope for, you know, troglodytes like me too. You know, wait. It's my EPIC slide. So now I am part of the EPIC leadership team. And that's why I thought that while I'm going to focus on language assessments, I would like to start off by talking a little bit about equity, diversity, and inclusion. It's become my motto in life because of EPIC, joining EPIC. So I just want people to be aware of certain criteria that become relevant suddenly, and we shouldn't forget that the way different students handle technology, first of all, you know, availability and access is not the same across the student body. And also when we assign them tasks and all that we're going to assess them on, we shouldn't assume how familiar they are with that, using that technology, or how easy it is for them to use, you know, some function or feature on CCLE, especially when they know that they're going to be graded for that. Many students may lack the quiet space for assessment and for learning. So while we're exposing them to, you know, acquiring something, it's not the same as it was before a few weeks, right? And they certainly miss the academic environment and the engagement. So, which all feeds into, when we're assessing them, a whole piece of their background knowledge is missing, or the interaction is missing. So we cannot evaluate them the same way as before. Many of my students are in very different time zones. That's also got to do with the fact that I'm in Asian languages and culture. So many of our students are back in Asia, that too different time zones in Asia. So not just the teaching, but when we are assessing them, you know, we have to be cognizant of this fact and adjust for it. Of course, we are all aware of students who have registered with CAE. And another issue that I'm facing, especially in language teaching and learning, is, you know, we're very used to handouts and all being printed out, or you know, so how do they mark it up while learning also? And some people may not even have tablets. So when we are doing PDFs and all, especially in languages that don't use the Roman script? Do they have computers that can adjust for the font, or once we convert everything into PDF, it's just a totally different sphere again. So without a printer, are they able to mark it up or look for word meanings or underline something? It's not so easy for the students, right? Now CCLE itself does have features, and we are all learning to use that, but I'm looking at it from the student perspective. People like me in a language classroom, very used to calling on students for quick assessment of their progress. But in this weird setting, it is, we have to be conscious not to suddenly call out on someone. And I actually sent out a survey, and I asked them, is it okay if I call on you? And if you don't want me to call on you, then just let me know. And of course, we are using breakout rooms I teach a very large class. Although it's a language class, many of our Asian languages and cultures language classes are huge. So we have to use these breakout rooms where students feel better. Here are my R's of moving into this remote teaching and learning and queuing up for assessments. We have to restart and redesign our course. Many of us in spring quarter, we've been teaching the same course for years, but my suggestion is just don't do that. Don't pick up your syllabus or course from last spring and try to use it with remote teaching. Rethink your goals and objectives. Perhaps take it as an opportunity. There's that saying, don't let a disaster or calamity, the opportunity, go to waste, right? So use it to revamp your course, revise your assessment methods. And this is especially true in, I think, in languages, where we are so used to, we love certain topics, and because testing is easy, like spit out the directions or something like that, and it might turn out to be pointless, especially today with Google Maps and all. I mean, really, how many times are you going to ask for directions? And so let it go. Or some other hackneyed tests, just let it go. It might work okay in face-to-face classroom, but not for remote teaching. Reduce the assessment burden. Don't constantly try to test them, or don't build up to a huge, big assessment at the end. Please be kind. And let me skip a few. Hold several reviews before any assessments. And I must also add that it's not necessarily everything that I am doing, although I'm doing a lot of this, but it's what one should be doing for language assessments. Okay. One last statement on inclusion. Please make sure that there are multiple methods of delivery of instructions and on the assessment with a lot of repetition. For language assessments, it should be task-based, like focus on what task is being accomplished, or what are you asking them to accomplish. Keep as much of it offline, and then they can go on to CCLE and record or write or submit or whatever. And if you're going to do it in class during the Zoom session, then give them enough notice that I'll be asking you to go out and complain to someone about something. I mean, give them enough prep and notice. During the in-class assignment, slow down, be patient, keep a narrower focus with the smaller parts to the assessment. my suggestion for group work is use it only for participation grade and not to base, a huge amount of the actual grade on this group work. It's very unfair. So you have to adjust for that. Co-opt the students, let them know that you are also rethinking and going through things in a different way. Objectives, make sure that you have a clear statement of overall objectives of your course with explicit breakdown for the grades, and objectives of the assessment also. I actually say avoid a points-based system for language classes. Like, don't say 90 to 95 is this much, and 85 or 87 to 89 is this much, or something, because you will not be able to justify 1 or 2 point differences, but it'll have a major impact on their grade. So just be aware of that. Make sure that there is a link between the learning and the assessment. So whatever you're teaching and what are they getting out of it, so that you're testing only things that should be tested or need to be tested. And how do you link it up to the grades, which is what most of the students are concerned about, especially in spring quarter. For languages, it means that it is the third quarter of a year-long course. So this is where it's all coming together for them, or or the opposite, which is what we don't want to happen in spring quarter. Student as navigators, help them take charge of their assessments so that they are able to be not just comfortable with their grades, but they can predict how they're doing so that nothing is a nasty surprise. Put some progress indicators on your, based on your syllabus, like the topics that are mentioned. Create some self-assessment tools, like it could be quizzes, etc., but only for assessment and learning. Like they can take it multiple times, but not for grades. There's something called the ACTFL can-do statements. I have put a link to the ACTFL document. If you go there, you can actually download PDF forms. ACTFL actually has made a lot of their publications free or given access to their library. Use it. And these can-do statements help a student realize, what they can and cannot do. Like, I can, blah, blah, blah. I actually make them fill out their own I can-do statements based on the syllabus and the class outlines, what did you learn kind of thing. Make sure that it is project-based for languages and divided into smaller achievement goals, not like a whole big project like create this or that ultimately, in 10th week. And always keep your grading basis as being very encouraging, so that until the very last week, they have hope of doing well. That is, by the time of the midterm, if there's nothing they can do about improving their grade, then that's very discouraging, okay? This is something a little bit about project-based language learning, and it helps with differentiated grading because we have large language classes, but each one can perform to their level, and it is more about progress made rather than an absolute grading criteria. People are very worried about what happens if the student is using other materials, etc. You co-opt the student, encourage them to take responsibility, break down the project into smaller task-based assignments, and then, overall design it such that cheating is not possible, but overtly discuss the use of dictionaries, or, I dissuade, I prohibit my students from using Google Translate because it comes up with utter nonsense. So let them know that what they can and cannot use to succeed. Very important to have very good rubrics for project-based or task-based assignments. Determine the different categories, divide them up by oral versus reading, writing, and then what is important to you is it's not simply whether we understood the student or what they were trying to accomplish, but how much are we focusing on pronunciation or spelling, or if it's non-Roman script, their writing, how much importance do we give to being correct in grammar or the type of language being used, etc. I also tell language colleagues, think just broadly in terms of A and B, and later on worry about B plus or A minus and all. And again, all this will be tied to some very good spelling out of specificities on the rubrics. Here are the links, and I'll post them so that you know where to go. The first one, there's a National Resource Center at Hawaii that has tons of materials on project-based language learning. The second one is the ACTFL can-do statements. The third one is the common European reference framework, and they have slightly modified the can-do statements, and it is available for all European languages, but we can adapt from there and use it for all our languages. Thank you. I'm sorry that took me a bit time. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, Lionel, are you out there?
Hello, yes, I am. Thank you. Thanks for everyone for being here, and thanks for asking me to speak. I teach in World Arts and Cultures Dance, and I'm a choreographer. And the course I'm teaching right now is the senior capstone project in our department as well. Although in the fall, I'm supposed to teach the introductory first year class. And I'm thinking a lot about that class and fall and where we're gonna be then as well. So some of what I have to say has to do with both of those scenarios. The biggest thing I can say, and I'll try not to repeat anything that any of my colleagues have already said, is just nimbleness by all of us and them. I'm doing my best to simply respond to the students. Some of what that means for me specifically is the arts are very contact heavy hours. And so I simply can't spend that much time on Zoom, and neither can my students. So I've broken up my class in much smaller batches. And so we'll be on for a bit and then leave, and then some will come back and then leave, and then others will come back and leave. I've even, because it's a fairly small seminar type class in terms of its scale, have created a bunch of meetings outside of class time, specifically with individual students, so that I can even shorten my class time, because it's a 4-hour class, and there's no one can be on Zoom for 4 hours on one thing. So that's the sort of first part of it. And then that's in terms of structure of the class, but that impacts assessment, since that's sort of what we're supposed to be chatting about, which I'll just say thank you for saying conversation starters, because I have no idea what I'm doing either. I think we're all making this up as we go. For me, it's a capstone project. They were supposed to have a final production in a room with their cast, with people watching. That's obviously simply not going to happen. So my first task was just the psychological impact of getting them to accept that as well. And that's ongoing. And then the next was then, how do I grade what they're making? And I think the big thing for me was not to decide one specific result, which they all then had to come up with. Some will be doing public showings, some will be doing private showings just for the class, some will be showings with passwords that are available to certain people for whom they choose. But so for me, it's trying to get out of any kind of specific rubric that applies to everyone. I can do that because it's a small boutique class, and the scale that many arts classes have that are practice-based and that have those kinds of contact hours. Let me see if there was anything else I meant to say that I didn't. I guess the other thing is there's a lot of goodwill right now from the students, and I feel like from us, and that's the crisis mentality, at least that I'm experiencing from my students. And so the curiosity for me is how much of this is kind of quick fix Band-Aid while we go, and where does it shift if this becomes a whole new different case? And that's the question that I'm interested in discussing as well. What happens if fall goes online and then you have first-year students for whom that's their collegiate experience, and you're not adjusting to something, but instigating something with them. And I have no response at the moment, but would like to talk about that.
Thank you. Thank you. Pierre?
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome. Thanks a lot for inviting me to speak. My name is Pierre Weil. I'm a professor in the economics department. What I would like to share today is my experience in administering a traditional exam online. So what happened was I was teaching in the winter and had to move my assessment online within like 3 or 4 days, and have 2 classes, twice the same, with a total of about 160 students, and had to find a way to administer some exam with CCLE and other resources to those 160 students. So first, I see Caroline is on the chat. I would like to thank her first because she helped me enormously. So she spent over an hour with me trying to set up the parameter of the multiple choice question exam. So I know there are 50 people, so maybe that's 50 hours that she's just she's at risk of spending now, but she's been of enormous help. So I would like to thank her for that. And the way, with her help, the exam was designed. So we kept a very traditional format. It was a bit for lack of being able of being more creative within this very short time. We did multiple choice. CCLE has a lot of flexibility and can allow you to create a lot of to parameterize the exam in many ways, including ways that allow the CAE student to have the time they need to take the exam. And then we organize the proctoring of the exam using the TA via Zoom. So we I had like several TAs, 4 TAs, and each of them was in charge of about 40 students in 4 different Zoom sessions. So again, you can parameterize Zoom in ways that allow students to only speak to the TA and not speak among themselves. Students had to put their camera on. I didn't have much technical glitch. Everything went relatively smoothly. And TAs were receiving, and so I could go in all the Zoom session of the TA. TA were receiving questions, and when they were receiving questions, they could send them to me via Skype. And that's how we managed all the questions that were being asked. We asked students to introduce themselves at the beginning of the exam, so that we had a record of who was attending. We used screen share to give instruction to all students in each Zoom session. And we put the first question on the exam of CCLE, asking students to acknowledge that they will not give nor receive any help during the exam. Overall, I did not receive much complaint from the students. The exam seemed to have gone well. It was done a bit in a rush, so I acknowledge that there might have been more creative way to design assessment, but that at least worked. The students did very well, so I actually gave probably too much time for them to do the multiple choice question. But that reduced stress, and overall, I feel they could show they have learned from the class. Then over this last week of the winter quarter, and I'm guessing also everyone has similar experience. I found that office hours were taking a different turn, and also were giving me different ways to assess students and discuss with them. And I also noticed that students were using technology in more creative way than and I had a lot to learn from them. So I got several times text support in real time from students, asking them, oh, so how do I do this? And then the chat box was giving me instant answers. And then there are also Zoom and other allows to use the chat window in we see it right now in ways that I find very interesting, and allow to pace questions and answer questions in ways that I found quite good for everyone learning. Students also started answering each other's questions during office hours, and that I thought was worked very well as well. All right, so thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to share this experience.
Thank you. Beth, are we moving?
Yeah, so we can move into breakout rooms if people would like to be able to discuss in smaller groups before we kind of open it up for more questions. But we could also, I'm open, Muriel, if you want to just take questions here, we could do that too.
Whatever works for everybody.
I think we can go ahead and get started with the conversation. People will just join us if they're still, for some reason, stuck in cyberspace. They'll make their way back.
Okay, sounds good.
So I see a question about security for feedback. We talked about using CCLE for that in that group, but if Chris, if you want to talk more about your question and feedback remotely in general. And then I see Tawny's group had some conversation about creative assessment, which sounds like it could be really interesting.
So is Asako there? Or maybe she can't unmute herself. Oh, yes, there she is. Can she unmute herself? Or do we have to unmute her?
Oh, I think I'm mute right now.
You're unmuted. We can hear you.
Mm-hmm.
Did you want to say what you said in the breakout room about different ways of providing feedback to students on their work through CCLE and other?
Yes. So for the assignment, and you give the assignment, and the student can submit the various forms like MP3 for the like audio, or MP4 or video, and also the handwriting and as a JPEG or any format, and you can set up and they can submit. And when you give the feedback to the students, and you can also choose the way of the feedback as like audio feedback or video feedback or lighting on the feedback field, or you can just attach the feedback comments on a Word or something like that. And for the assignment, and capacity is 100 megabyte. So, and audio and all the lighting should be no problem, but for the video submission, and sometimes in the student's video file is larger than 100 megabyte. In that case, I ask the student and to upload to their own video portal like YouTube, but please don't share the URL to others. So that's so only I can see that video, but I discourage the students and to submit larger file. and usually set in a smaller than 100 megabyte.
May I say again, from the inclusion point of view, sometimes it is very difficult for students to upload, not just to the cloud, but just being able to handle big files. So we have to be conscious of such assignments.
Mm-hmm.
If
Yeah.
we're assigning video projects and all, my suggestion is to break it up into smaller parts, because the students may not have access to a good internet connection or to good devices that can help them upload. And then for non-Roman script languages, when they take a picture of their assignment, there are some free apps that turn it into PDFs, and they make it much more legible. So they can use, free programs like Tiny Scanner and things like that, and convert it into PDFs before they upload. But I completely agree also that not just feedback should be in different, can be or should be in different forms. But I think this is what I meant by instructions for assignments and projects should be both written and recorded on the assignment app under CCLE, so that they have different ways of accessing the instructions, which is literally what we do when we are face-to-face in the exam room. We tend to not just have written instructions, but we are also participating with them and explaining things or whatever, setting it up orally also. And in our department, we are also doing Zoom proctoring, not necessarily to prevent cheating, but precisely because if they need help, then we're available at the time of the testing to answer questions.
Yes, I'd like to talk about some of the issues raised in our group 4. As you see, we talked about some different ways to evaluate student performance, things that we generally don't use. I think Kathy Bond had the wonderful idea if, in classes that were sized appropriately to have oral exams as a final assessment, rather than trying to have students take an exam remotely. And we both channeled back our inner, I think, scared teenagers when we both had oral exams as undergraduates. And I think we both said, Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong, they were terrifying, but we studied really hard for them. Am I right about that? Yes. Yeah. And I think one thing we're also concerned about, sounds like everybody else is concerned about, is the fact that some of our students are not going to have reliable internet access. And I think, no matter what happens, that's something we're always going to have to confront. I mean, I think internet access, and also if they're home, they might not have adequate study space or a quiet space and all of that. And even, I'm not teaching this quarter, but at the end of winter quarter, I was hearing that from some of my students as they were studying for the final. And that's something that I think is always going to be an issue. And I don't know, have others encountered this, thought about this, thought of ways that we might try and help our students with these issues?
Yeah, if I can jump in. I've been leaning really heavily on the discussion forum tool in CCLE because since I'm leading a seminar class right now, a big component of the grade is their participation in discussion. But for a variety of reasons, including students who have kids at home and really are very distracted, or students who have unreliable internet, what I've done is I've set up a discussion group that I ask students to participate in addition to the seminar and actually before the seminar. So I ask them each to just post what I call a think piece, so just a paragraph long reflection on their reading, and then to comment on 2 other students' work. And I found that that's really useful for students who are able to join the Zoom discussion. It kind of gets it going before we meet. And so like we avoid that awkwardness when we're all kind of sitting here staring at a screen. I can kind of draw students into the discussion because they've already made some points. So if someone's being really quiet, I can, say, hey, you made a really interesting point in your think piece that I think relates to this. Would you mind sharing that with the group? So it's a good management tool, but also it means I can give participation points to students who aren't able to join in because they are still participating in the conversation through this offline forum. So it's a really easy tool to use and I would definitely recommend it.
We have Asian languages and cultures has students in very, very different time zones, and we, they're like holding an exam for someone for whom it is 3 a.m. or whatever. It really doesn't work out well. And at the same time, since it's a language class, and we're testing their ability to read and write the script. So we can't make it completely, we can't get rid of the reading, writing bit, but we try to make adjustments. During the session, if they couldn't join us synchronously, then they're asked to submit an oral paragraph or a written paragraph about what did you learn, or even less than a paragraph, what did you learn from today's class, just to make sure that they're not putting it off, like not trying to watch 4 lectures at the same time, because in a language class, they will get left behind. So just to help them, stay with the class, is after every class, using the CCLE, either the forum feature or the assignment feature is like just a short bit on what did you learn from today's class in the target language.
Are there other issues that people would like to talk about? I see a lot of stuff in the chat.
We could talk about group 6, which included a couple of people who were mainly teaching seminars. And we pushed back a little bit on the question of best practices, although a lot of the things that you're talking about are simply good ideas. And you can borrow from them as you might. But it seemed to us 2 things, if I can summarize both sides of this. One is that we all have such individual styles, which we are busily trying to redefine in terms of this new medium for most of us. And it's not easy just to sort of, okay, I'm going to be this best practices thing. Instead, you find your way. And the other issue is, what I'm mainly hearing is evaluation should either be very gentle or non-existent, or it should be something like a take-home. Used to be something that can't be cheated, I think was one of the points that was made. That being the case, maybe we should rethink the relationship between teaching and evaluation and go back to getting the teaching done. I like a lot of what people are saying because it's in the nature of feedback rather than evaluation. But just maybe we need to not think about best practices yet, and think first about what kinds of evaluation are even appropriate. And we've sort of in a model of you have to give them a grade because they expect it, they need it. Now we told them they don't need a grade. So let's rethink that.
Well, they need the grade if they're graduating and going on to the market. This is how people are being evaluated, right? So sometimes it goes beyond us, right? Because the university did say that it's okay to take, certain types of classes as pass, non-pass, even though, like in our department with languages, they used to force, if it counted for the major, you had to take it for a grade, but then now they're allowing it to be taken as pass, non-pass. But for languages, that's kind of okay. At the same time, if they're going into a specific use of that language grade, then they need to show, let's say, an A grade or something. And especially since this is the third quarter of a year-long course, then, they've been working hard first quarter, second quarter, and they kind of they need that A grade. They've been working towards it. So I completely agree with you that, the relationship has changed, but somehow I feel it's not in my hands to take it away from them. I'd like to encourage learning, and they are doing that, but that grade thing they're quite obsessed with that. And it is UCLA, and that's why they came to UCLA, right? No, please go ahead.
Well, I mean, there are institutions that don't have grades, and they seem to thrive. So I do think it's a question that we should be asking ourselves and trying to pull ourselves out of the mindset that we all have absorbed that grading is that important.
I think I meant for the students, or once they've done so much, maybe from fall, if it continues like this, the next batch, we can do something. But I feel it's kind of the students need their A grade is what they say. Yeah, but I appreciate what you're saying completely.
I would just imagine that for students who are graduating now and going out into the world, if they have a transcript of all past grades this spring, everybody who encounters them will know exactly what this is about. And I don't think, one of my colleagues was at Columbia in 1968, the spring of 1968. He said, I can't remember what exactly happened, but he said it was just, an understanding that that semester was that semester, and it bore very little relationship in many ways to the other semesters. And he is now a professor at UCLA. So things did not go that badly for him. So, I think if this continues, I think we have to have even deeper, more serious talks about this. But as things stand now, if this is a one-off, I don't think anybody will be particularly harmed by having just passing grades. And Ray, you're right. Yeah, there are still institutions that don't have grades.
But if I could just maybe kind of jump off of what Ray was saying, I was in that group as well. And I think, this is an opportunity for us to think, and this kind of goes back to everything that's been said in the session so far, but an opportunity for us to think about, like, what do we really want students to get out of the class? How is the assessment going to kind of work with that? But also what students really want to get out of the class at this point, which might be a little bit different from what they were planning to get out of the class, 3 months ago. So I think there's maybe some ways that we can bring in. I know one of the TAs I work with is doing what she calls ungrading, which is this whole thing that I won't get into here, but kind of more of a contract-based grading system where the student decides what goals they want to meet. And so I think that we can kind of facilitate that, and that might be a different way of approaching assessment as well, that at least some of the students I've talked to have been interested in, if not totally sure about yet.
And I think it's also an issue about what kind of course it is, what kinds of skills are being taught, what kinds of knowledges are being taught, whether evaluation is the appropriate tool or whether some kind of feedback loop of a different kind might be appropriate.
And for languages, I mean, that was the intention with those can-do statements and those self-assessment and progress indicators and, you know, task-based. You give them a small, are you able to communicate on this? These are all proficiency-based assignments. These are not like, you know, grammar check or spelling check or something, but more, what are you doing with the, what can you do with the language that you have learned? So it is far more based on learning outcomes and what will it be used for? And I think students, that's what I meant by students as, you know, taking charge of their learning and co-opting students into the process, making them navigators so that they can set up their goals. And my job is simply to facilitate them getting to that goal. Many of them are seniors who already have their jobs lined up on the basis of, you know, what they've achieved so far, and they just need to keep up with that and get to a certain level.
I would say group 7, I just was going to call you out for your comments. I thought it would be really appropriate for you guys to expand on this.
Well, the thing that we talked about in group 7 was, and it wasn't my idea, but since I'm talking already, I'll say it, that is this a time to be focusing on acquisition of new knowledge, or is it a time to be focusing on reinforcing existing knowledge and going deeper with that? But I also wanted to go back to what Raymond was talking about a little bit, because I think, you know, I believe there was a call or a Zoom earlier today for more South Campus, and this is arts, humanities, and social sciences, I believe. And I think one of the things that is fascinating to me when I end up on these larger, most of campus or broader campus things, not in the arts where I live, is how all our disciplines have very specific kinds of knowledge and epistemologies. And then we get together and we almost think that they teach each other something, but they aren't applicable across the board in even ways. And in fact, the danger of these broader full campus or larger campus is that we create a set of criteria that apply to all the disciplines as if that were possible. And I think one of the things that I think is intriguing to think about is, okay, well, in these small capstone seminars, why are we grading them? What's the point in these kind of, you know, really thinking through the situations? And what I think that's more important than you know, a list of that all of us have to go. I mean, I put learning objectives in my syllabus, but I always have a really hard time doing it because each student's going to have a different objective, especially if it's a graduate class or if it's a smaller seminar. So I guess I wanted to kind of speak to the way in which we are all dealing with different disciplines that generate knowledge in different ways, and how crucial it is that we both respect and acknowledge that and learn from each other as opposed to imposing our rubrics onto each other. Yeah. I don't know. Sorry, it was a bit manifesto-like. Sorry.
Don't apologize. It was really interesting to hear.
Somebody raised the question about what happens if spring quarter is not a one-off and we go into next year doing this. Well, summer session A, I don't know if anybody's teaching in summer session. Summer session A has been designated remote now. There's been no decision made on summer session C. And also the fall is obviously looming. Has anybody thought about, you know, what this will be like, how we might approach this if this is going to be a long-term change in our teaching?
So the good news is that there are resources on campus that have been built over time, not just in CAT and SEALS, but now in the online teaching and learning group. There are 5 instructional designers who are assisting faculty with creating high quality online courses, which that's in contrast to what we're doing now, which may be high quality, but is certainly rushed and not well thought out. So I think we will have a lot of support to do that, to do a better job in fall?
It'll be a disaster for languages, especially for languages that are non-Roman script. And given that, language teaching is so student-centered, learner-centered, so highly interactive, so dependent on really high levels of energy from the instructor, I find it very difficult to be high energy on a Zoom, in a Zoom setting, and especially Asian languages and cultures, where our first year class is 100 students, and that too in using non-Roman script, and it's just they need to see a lot of things. Yes, I know we can do a lot through using a tablet or whatever, or yes, it is possible to use the keyboard, but then you're testing different skills by asking them to type, etc. It's just, and for me right now, there's a difference between online teaching and remote teaching. And this is just a getting by, but it is mercifully third quarter of a year-long course, so I know my students, and they know me, and we know where we were headed. If fall goes this way, it's not easy for languages to move to online teaching. So I differentiate between online teaching and remote teaching. And I think it will not be, I don't think, I shouldn't say this, but students will not get their money's worth. And I think UCLA also is worried about that. That's why they started calling it remote teaching rather than online teaching. I know for Asian languages and cultures, it's going to be very tough.
Well, I think it'll be tough for everybody in some fashion. I guess, is there anybody who runs in the corridors of power to know when we might even hear about fall quarter? Because I'm sure it's being discussed, so we have no idea.
I think May 15th is a target date for making some kind of decision.
Oh, about fall. Okay. Also
about summer C.
Oh, about summer C. Okay, so that means fall couldn't be that far behind since summer C ends in early September. Then we have the other great question: will the university provide equipment to students if we're online for the long term?
So there was equipment made available to students with financial need. Those were grants to students to buy computers and other needed equipment, and I don't know if that would continue.
That program ended April 1st.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Well, that will certainly be a question. I'm just trying to look. Are there any things in the chat that we haven't, or any other issues that we have not addressed? There have been so many really great thoughts and questions here. What have we missed? Is there anything anybody would like to add?
Well, I know Asako has left, but she raised a great question about, I mentioned that things are only as good as your rubrics, and she raised this question about, are there templates for rubrics, or how do we use the rubrics? Or even if I use the rubric and set one up, my TAs are unable to understand it. And that's something we're struggling in. Again, I'll refer only to Asian languages and cultures, is first of all, the instructors are barely, able to switch or whatever. But TAs are, not only do they have their own learning burden with their own courses and their work, but trying to shift to remote teaching as a TA for languages is really, really tough. And then all of a sudden, like my TAs are from South Campus and have nothing to do with language teaching, but then all of a sudden, are they really expected to learn everything about constructing rubrics, or what are these can-do statements? What are the proficiency skills? Or, there's a big gap? And then that was a good question. And quite frankly, we'll have to spend a lot of time working as a group to come up with templates and rubrics that we can share.
I mean, I think this goes back to the larger point that not all of our disciplines are the same, and we cannot, we cannot, offer courses to students that are all the same in some fashion. And we've got another question here. Is the university going to provide services to digitize textbooks? Wow. Okay. And Adrian, you said you don't know. Wow. If we're online in the fall, that will be a whole host of other issues. But I assume if we're going online in the fall, we can all meet again like this, right? Oh, I see a hand. Kathy raised. Oh, thank you for using the hand raise.
I'm so proud of myself that I could do it. I guess I've got a few thoughts on what I think might be happening in the fall. This is nothing, I'm not in the halls of power. I'm supposed to be on sabbatical this year. But sort of realistically, I think a good scenario would be that we're not on the complete shelter in place rules that we're trying to follow now. But it's hard for me to believe that lots of people are going to be eager to be spending a lot of time in the room with 300 people. That could very well be the new normal for a while. But I don't want to sound like a Pollyanna here, but if UCLA could use its very ample empty space in ways that, say, students who don't have good internet access would be able to come to a much emptier campus, like I would be comfortable with students using the computer in my office to do what they needed to do. If somebody was, monitoring it and they were signing up for slots, and that a lot of us would be doing more of the remote stuff. It seems really unlikely to me that we're going to start fall quarter and it's going to be like, oh, back to the way it was last fall. That I just have trouble imagining that. So, for what that's worth.
No, I think you're right. It's hard to imagine going back to the way everything was by the end of September. Yeah. And so, yeah. So yes, students coming, or I know would be, what's going to happen to the 100-person lecture courses? I mean, maybe those will be delivered remotely and smaller ones not. I don't know.
Yeah. Gigi has her hand raised.
Oh,
my digital and actual one. And sorry, I came in at the end of the discussion section, so I missed a lot, or the breakout rooms. But I wanted to just share a few things as someone who adopted a 100-person class the week before school started, that I have found, and I guess sprinkling a few thoughts. One is that I've invited speakers in from all over the country as an opportunity to think outside the box of how to engage the students with people we would not have gotten in the classroom. I've been teaching with rubrics for a decade, so it was in many ways shifting gears about 10%, but there's lots of great rubric resources, so glad to talk with people about that. That we've got a 105-person discussion board going to get the students to be sense-making their experience together. And so having students incorporating the sense-making part of living right now into living through class has been a really rich experience. So glad to share thoughts on that. And talking also to other institutions who are doing this to find others we can share resources and speakers and time and other things has been really rich so far. And talking about that with session A with several other institutions about sharing resources, speakers, and stuff like that. So I'm finding a lot in reaching sideways and reaching out. And I think it's great we're here talking with our UCLA family, but there's other institutions also doing cool, crazy, in some cases healing things to think about. So,
oh, great, thank you. So I see that we are getting to the end of time, and so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Are there other things that we would like to bring up at the end, or any takeaways that anybody would like to share? Not all at once, really. It's been a very, very, oh yeah, Lionel, yes, please go ahead.
I'll just continue on what Gigi said, in that I've been in contact with someone, or actually they got in touch with me, who's teaching a similar course at a different institution as a way to bring our students together, particularly because it's a senior capstone thing. So connecting across institutions is something that we could have done it last year, but we never thought of it. So it is interesting to think about the things that this enables, as opposed to the opposite as a way to think through. So I appreciate what you said, Gigi, but also want to add to it. Yeah.
So there are opportunities as well as challenges. So anybody?
What a new idea.
Others, or is it Miller time for everybody?
Is UCLA paying?
What do you think? What do you think? I think you've been here long enough to know that. If you want to offer anything else, then I think we close this down and release everybody to your own private happy hour.
Thank you.
I think this has been really great. Thank you all for participating. This has been incredibly stimulating, and I hope we get to do this again.
Thank you so much, everyone.